You're listening to the Sixers Beat with your host, Derek Bodner, right here on LibertyBallers.com and LibertyBroadcast.co.
Welcome, everybody. This is Derek Bodner. I'm joined by Rich Hofmann and Kyle Neubeck on the latest Sixers Beat. A couple of quick notes before we begin. Please do subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and the TuneIn Radio app, whichever you prefer. If you have your own app that you prefer to use, you can get the RSS feed over at SixersBeat.com. You can also check out the CLNS Radio app, where you can find ourselves, B-Ball Breakdown, Real GM Radio, Sam Vecini's Game Theory podcast, and many more. If you can, please do leave us a rating or review. It helps us get out to more Sixers fans, which we appreciate. And a quick word from our sponsor, Harry's Razors. Great shave, half the price. Go to harrys.com/SixersBeat for your free trial. That's Harry's, HARRYS.com/SixersBeat. This podcast was recorded before Friday's game against the Cleveland Cavaliers for context reasons. All right. And with all that out of the way, what we're going to talk about Hinkie and the Kings, obviously, and the report that came out that they might have interest in bringing him in above Vlade Divac in their to really run their basketball operations department. We're going to talk about injuries, and more injuries, and then we're going to get into a little bit about the NCAA tournament. Before we do get to that, though, guys, how you doing?
Pretty good. I think I've reached the point where I am about ready for this season to be over.
Yes. It was great that the rumor came out from multiple outlets that Sam Hinkie that the Kings had requested permission to interview Sam Hinkie. It was very deliberately worded, which gives us something to at least waste 20 minutes on, because you are right, we are in the doldrums of the season. Had that nice little break with the NCAA tournament, gives us an excuse to talk prospects, which is what we will be doing for the next couple of months. But yeah, it is not the, one of these years, I told somebody today, my goal is to cover a team where the games actually matter. And not quite there yet. Not yet.
It would be nice, but hey, as far as this Hinkie stuff goes, that was certainly a curveball, because of all the teams that could have been linked to hiring him. The Sacramento Kings were not high up on my list for the first team that would emerge on that front.
It was easily my favorite story of 2017. And, I mean, we're only in March right now. I don't think it's going to be topped either. So, I mean, just the irony of him trying to rebuild a team that he completely decimated with one trade. Just the idea of that, even if it's just an idea, even if it's just a report that they were granted permission to speak with him, was just amazing to me.
Yeah, there's I guess a couple ways. Kyle brought up the unlikelihood of it. And there's kind of two aspects of that, right? There's one part, which is what team would be looking to hire. And I think certainly Sacramento is likely from that aspect, regardless of how much they deny that they're looking. Right when that report came out, the Kings sent out a statement saying that they didn't request permission, that they're not looking to hire somebody above Vlade Divac. And then Woj immediately rebuked the rebuke. He denied the denial, which was perfect, because I like seeing Woj kind of get feisty like that. But there's certainly a team that you would say, okay, they're in the market for a front office makeover. But on the other hand, I think one of the big things, Sam is always going to want to be the longest view in the room kind of guy. That was one of his famous sayings. Pairing him up, and forget about how he decimated them just, a year and a half, 2 years prior. But pairing him with maybe the shortest view in the room and the most reactionary owner in the NBA would be kind of, on the one hand, hysterical to watch, and on the other hand, you would kind of feel bad for Sam, because you could just see him, whatever little bit of hair, and he seems like he's, genetics isn't exactly doing him a favor in that regard, but whatever little bit of hair he has left seems like would be gone very quickly.
Yeah, and I think one of my first instincts when this news came out was to text you guys and ask, there's no chance that he actually takes this job, right? Because despite the fact that there's such a scarcity of jobs available with the sort of power we would expect him to have if he took a job in Sacramento. I just don't know, especially after the experience that Sam had in Philadelphia, where he saw ownership turn pretty quickly on what was supposed to be an extended and patient rebuild, and what happens when the league gets involved. And at the initial suggestion, Woj has now deleted this, was that there's been some pressure from both minority owners in Sacramento and from external forces in the NBA. So
make them more professional.
Yeah, let's go on record here to the listeners that they want the Kings front office to be, quote, more professional. And so the irony being that essentially the reason that they pushed Hinkie out of Philadelphia to begin with is because they believe that the setup there and the plan was not professional enough. And now one of the top candidates for a new front office position that is also being sort of prompted by the league once again is that very same person. So there's a lot of mixed messaging here. And my expectation was always that if Sam was going to get involved in this again, I know he wants to, but I don't think he necessarily is like, he has to. I'm sure he would like to restore his image and not be known as the guy who resigned and sort of have to live on whatever the legacy of Embiid and Šarić and some of the guys he selected here. I don't think he wants that to be his lasting legacy, and he'd rather be in control of a team somewhere. But I just can't see him taking a job that's not with a forward-thinking but stable owner. Like the type of people that leap to the front of my mind are guys like Mark Cuban that have been on the cutting edge in some respects, but are not necessarily acting irrationally all the time and can see the forest for the trees. I know that Vivek certainly has shown an inclination to be a revolutionary, but his idea of being revolutionary is possibly playing 4-on-5 on defense to start fast breaks. So
there's a very thin line between revolutionary and insanity.
Yeah. So I guess that would be my caveat there, that I do understand the draw of an executive job with an NBA team, and I'm sure regardless of who the owner is, Sam or anybody else would at least consider it. But to me, from where I sit, it just seems like very low odds that he would take a job with a team like the Kings.
I think it's the second worst job in the NBA outside of Brooklyn. And I mean, it might even be worse than Brooklyn if you feel that Brooklyn is, Sean Marks has the freedom to enact sort of a long-term vision there. Do you guys think, I kind of wonder, it's just like the jokes sort of wrote themselves last night with, this was the equivalent of Doc Rivers trading for a guy who torched him in the Eastern Conference playoffs in like 2010
Yeah.
or like, or something like Vivek going up to him and saying, well, if we get you, do we get to undo that terrible trade? Like that's how this works, right? Like, and it's just, I mean, I can't see him. It's so true though that those jobs are so hard to come by. They're so freaking hard to come by. And I think that is sort of the caveat that Woj laid out there, but I'd rather take my chances and see if anything else was out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've spoken to Sam since he left. I just spoke to him a couple of weeks ago at Sloan, and I've talked to people around the team, and look, he's going to be very guarded about what he says. But the sense I always got talking to him was that he's going to be very selective about the ownership group of the next team he works for. He really wants to vet his next ownership group, which isn't really even an indictment on what happened here or how he felt about how things went down, but that's just how Sam approaches these opportunities. That's his nature. Remember, he previously interviewed here back in 2012 as well. So to go to that front office and that ownership group, I mean, look, somebody asked me on Twitter the other day, what would it take for you if you were in Sam's shoes to take that job? What kind of assurances would you need from Vivek that you would have the freedom, that you would have final say, that he wouldn't meddle? And I thought about it, and I mean, the only way I would, if I was in Sam's shoes, this is not for me or my financial situation or my odds of ever getting a GM job in a league, because I would take it and deal with it and be happy with however long I was there. But from Sam's position, I would need Vivek to sell the team. And I don't even think, that's not hyperbole. There's nothing, I'm being dead serious. There's no assurances based on Vivek's track record. There's no assurances that he would give me that would make me feel comfortable taking that job. So if Sam were to take this, and I think all of the reports from Zach Lowe to Woj to Mark Stein all said that they had no idea whether Sam was even interested in the job. And I think that was pretty telling. But if he did end up taking this job, it would be because, look, there are 30 of these in the world, and there's no assurances you're ever going to get one. But man, this is not the spot I would be looking for if I was him.
Yeah, I mean, we just had their current GM, head of basketball operations, admit that he had to take a worse deal for by far the best player on their team, the best player that they've had in the last 15 years or so since Weber left and that whole thing disintegrated. And reports later came out that part of that was because Vlade was afraid that Vivek was going to change his mind about whether he was actually okay with trading Cousins or not. So I just can't imagine somebody like Sam, who the perfect example to me. Michael Carter-Williams wins Rookie of the Year. And around the league, I would say he still was pretty highly thought of when the Sixers ended up dealing him, despite the obvious warts he had on his game. And Sam went ahead and traded him anyway. And so I can't imagine a world where if he drafted somebody in Sacramento and that player won Rookie of the Year, there's absolutely no way I can see Vivek or just the team culture and structure there saying, yeah, you know what? We're okay with just dealing that guy away to get a pick that we might not be able to cash in on for a few years. We want, they would try to market the hell out of that guy. They would paint him as the future savior that DeMarcus Cousins never was because of his attitude or whatever else. And so the type of forward thinking things that Sam did on a regular basis, I just don't see those avenues even being available to him necessarily in Sacramento. So I can't see it. It's not a marriage I can see working. Just
imagine the next time the next Buddy Hield comes out and this nitwit falls in love with him and really pushes to draft him or trade for him afterward. I can't imagine Sam not losing his mind. This was a guy who, took unconventional routes to get any small fraction of an edge he could get, to then be hamstrung by a guy who wants to have that kind of an influence in player personnel decisions.
Wants to have your draft room film for a mini documentary for Grantland. Sam Hinkie would lose his fucking mind if the owner of the organization mandated something like that or signed off on that. I know that the Kings, as far as they were in a weird spot during that time where they were sort of trying to save the franchise and get the arena built, and there's all sorts of external factors there, but there is no way in hell that Hinkie would be cool with somebody just having that sort of access to the draft process and publishing that afterwards.
If I see Sam in the 2017 version of the Nick Rocks chant, I'm gonna lose my mind. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna feel bad for him, but I'm gonna die.
That whole video is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I mean, we always talk about Nick Rocks and, for me, Stauskas and all that stuff, but just the idea of bringing in all of these interns, these analytic guys, and having Chris Mullen and Mitch Richmond listen to them, and just clearly they don't give one shit at all about what they're hearing. And then those guys are all in the room, and then Pete D'Alessandro has been filmed for, I don't know, like a month solid. They get to the draft, and then it's Vivek making the pick. It's just crazy. For me, not Stauskas, but for me, I don't care if Vivek was Mark Cuban. just saying shoots like Steph, tall like Clay, I'm out to steal a Cuban line. Like, that's just no way. I'm not doing that anymore. And it's just this comes back to just my personal opinion. The more an owner is involved in personnel decisions, the more that the owner thinks he knows about the game, the worse he is in general. I mean, look,
or CEO. Throw CEO into that group too.
Sure. There are some exceptions, obviously. I think Cuban's a pretty smart guy, and I think, even though I think he lets Donnie Nelson do his job and Rick Carlisle do his job, I think he's obviously pretty involved. But, like, as a general rule of thumb, the more an owner's involved, the worse that is. So, he's the worst case scenario, because not only is he super involved, he's also seems like an idiot when it comes to a basketball standpoint. Like, there's no real other way to put it.
Yeah, I feel like we're piling on here, but none of it is really out of bounds.
It's fun though, isn't it? Like, especially at this time of year when we have so little to talk about for the Sixers, to pile on Vivek, who's from a distance, he is one of my favorite guys in the NBA, because he is from a distance. Like, if I covered that team or was a fan of the team, he would seriously make me consider changing my loyalty until he sold the team. But from a distance, I love him. He's priceless. He's priceless.
Just in general too, I'd love to see Sam back in the league. That would be so much fun, just to see him take over another team. Not the Kings, hopefully, but the idea of Sixers fans feeling conflicted once, like, his team plays well against the Sixers would just be some of the funniest shit I've ever seen. And I think he'd do a great job, obviously, too. So, yeah.
I think the more interesting thing for me would be, and he wouldn't be able to do this with the Kings, but would be to see how he would approach if it was a rebuild, if it was trying to get some team over the top, whatever it was. I would be interested to see what he learned from his time in Philadelphia and how he changed his thought process and how he was going to, I guess, manipulate the pieces in place to his advantage. Because I know he's a smart enough guy, and someone who I think is, again, not to keep bringing up that MCW trade, but someone who has shown that he is more than okay with recognizing, like, hey, maybe I made a mistake, or maybe we need to move forward on a decision that I made quicker than other people might. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with saying that might not have been the right call, or that this is the right call now versus 18 months ago or whatever it was. I think it'd be fascinating to see how he adjusts based on everything that he learned from the few years that he was in charge of the Sixers, on top of everything he knows from his prior careers, from being an assistant GM under Morey and all that, and just having some time to reflect now that he's not actively in the league. I know that he's still been scouting. He was seen at a Washington game watching Markelle Fultz this year. So, yeah, I'm very interested to see what his next step is and exactly how that unfolds.
It would also be interesting to see how he would approach rebuilding. Because, clearly there aren't many moves that he can make to make them an immediately relevant team. But they also have, they have quite a bit of cap space coming up in the summer. But how are you going to lure them to Sacramento? So you would think his approach would be pretty similar to what he did in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But obviously that 2019 pick, that changes things a little bit. That makes it a little bit, if part of his philosophy was he needed as many options to hit a home run as he could, and that extending the quote-unquote tank kind of gave you more options and increased your probability of success, it's harder to justify that when you're only going to have, you're going to be 2 years in this thing and only one high-level pick. And even that pick, well, I guess, yeah, only one, because you can't really tank any more this year than you already have, although it would be nice if they would figure that out quicker than later.
Come on, Memphis. What are you doing?
That
Come on,
2019
Clippers. They blew a fucking 18-point lead in the fourth quarter. What the hell are they doing?
Fire everybody.
Did you see that stat where it was in the last 20 or so years, something like 6,200 teams had an 18-plus point lead with 5 minutes or less remaining? They were the first one to blow it. It was pretty amazing.
I saw something on NBA TV. I think that might have been the worst loss in NBA regular season history, maybe ever.
Yeah, it could have been. It was bad.
Yeah.
It was bad. But yeah, it would be interesting how he would approach that with the 2019 pick gone. But as we all said, I don't expect that to happen. I would be stunned. I would be floored, shocked, a little excited, a little sad, because that would be a tough spot for him to be in. But all right, moving on to our team, the Sixers team, the team we cover, the team that everybody here listening to cares about. Well, I assume you do. Otherwise, why the hell are you listening to us? Joel Embiid finally last week, Friday night, or announced on a Friday night, probably happened Friday during the day, had surgery to repair the torn meniscus that wasn't an issue, or at least at one time was thought not to be an issue, or at least at one time was said not to be an issue. Who knows what the real truth is? But they had the surgery, had it out in California. He will be back to full weight-bearing activity in 2 weeks, or about 2 weeks, I think is what they said. And then they expect him to be resuming basketball activity this summer. How much, if you had to place a confidence on that timeline, how confident are you?
Have we watched the Jahlil Okafor situation at all over the last year? That is a short way of saying I don't have a lot of confidence in the timeline, especially because they have every reason to be more conservative than the norm with Embiid. So I think they're going to be very cautious with this. I think the thing that was interesting to me, and I know that a lot of this comes down to what they're able to do, but I believe in the press release they said that they've removed part of the meniscus. It was not a repair or replace, which is correct. That was one of the big questions to me going in. And from what I was told, that was that wasn't really, the team had no say in that. That was once the doctors got into his knee and saw that, they made the call that was what they could do. But typically when we've seen full removals have been more in like emergency situations, but in general, a lot of times removal is like a last ditch thing, and they'd rather be able to repair or replace it, because you can't really, once you remove it, there's not a whole lot of protection within the knee. It's not going to regenerate.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, that was not super encouraging. I don't think anybody should take that as good news. Now, if they only removed the small piece of it, it's probably not as big a deal, but even still, that was not exactly reassuring regarding a player whose health is already a pretty major concern for his future NBA hopes.
Well, I think the key there is what part they removed and how much of it, and we just don't have that kind of information.
Right.
So.
But it is scary to think about.
Yeah, I was a little surprised to hear that they think he's going to be back on the court by the summer, and maybe I shouldn't have been, because once his surgery gets announced, Philadelphia just goes into a complete panic, and you hear some people throwing out timelines of like 8 months or something like that. And I mean, whether he can play in the summer really doesn't matter to me. If he's back, roughly to around 100% by the time training camp rolls around, and what's that, late September and October, that's good with me.
As Rich said last week, he could be physically capable of running a marathon, and he's probably not playing in summer league anyway.
Yeah.
So if he's good by the time, if they go to Stockton or Camden or wherever that is at training camp, that's good with me. And obviously, that gives them a little bit of time between sometime in the summer and then. So, it remains to be seen. But like, I don't want to. It's when you talk about this guy's health, I mean, it's still such a question mark moving forward.
It better be Camden next year. Look, Stockton's a nice place. I don't mean any ill will towards it. I don't feel like making that drive again. You built a world-class training facility. It better be Stockton.
Parking there sucks too. God.
Yes, it does. Oh my God. Anyway, nobody cares.
I was going to say, this is a very, I would make fun
Yeah.
of people on Twitter if they were complaining about the parking at training camp. So I'm not letting you two off the hook either.
I feel for you Stockton kids. I'll put it that way. All right.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, look, would you have preferred that it happened a month ago? Probably. At least if for no other reason than you'd probably see him at least on a court, maybe taking some jumpers, doing something at this time. You could be a little more reassured that he was on the track back. But ultimately, if this really is the timeline that they're talking about, that month probably doesn't matter until it does, until there's a setback or healing not as expected, because these players, the Sixers players, do not have actual setbacks. Healing is just either less or slower than expected, which I'm not sure the real medical difference between a setback and healing slower or less than expected, but there is one. But yeah, it would have been nice to have a little more cushion, but there's plenty of time. But I mean, these were all comments we made when Okafor had his 4 to 6 week surgery last spring too. So
Ben Simmons looks okay, huh?
Okay. Well, let's transition to that. Do you care that he was dunking before a game?
Not necessarily. I guess it's tough to say because healing less than expected, or whatever the hell they choose to call it at any given time. I don't know that necessarily precludes Ben Simmons from being allowed or able to dunk. I know everybody has bad memories now because that Joel Embiid through the legs dunk came before we found out later that he was going to have another surgery, and so... Which was
Max Rappaport's fault.
Yeah, it's all Max and Sandro, too. He was still here when that happened, right? Yeah, so...
He was, yep.
Way to go, Sandro. Yeah, so I think people have a bad taste in their mouth from when that happened, and they'd rather think that the players that are supposedly hurt and unable to play and are out for the season should be in ice baths or giant packages of bubble wrap, or choose your own adventure there. But I mean, come on, these guys they're trying to get, part of rehab is also pushing your body's limits. I know that has to be within reason. You're not going to go out, and that's the reason why they're not playing in full games or even 5-on-5 or anything like that. But I'm okay with it as long as the big caveat here, as long as the training and medical staff is not telling him not to do that stuff. And even then, I have a well-documented mistrust of those people. So I'm going to hope that they know what they're doing with Ben Simmons. I do think it's good to see him showing a little bit of explosion. We've seen him dunk during some pregame footage in the past, and it was a little bit lacking. He wasn't really exploding or going full bore with effort. So seeing him get anywhere near full effort again and full explosion is definitely reassuring for me on some level, even if it might preclude bad news in the future that we don't know about yet.
Yeah, he's been dunking for about, I'd say, he was dunking before the MRI showed that the healing wasn't as much as they had hoped. But yeah, it's like you said, it wasn't as explosive as that move. Short answer for me is no. I'm not that worried about it, because Simmons seems to me like a guy who understands his body and understands the risks, even more so than the thing about that Embiid dunk. He's just such a bigger guy, as big as Simmons is. Like, Embiid is massive, and it always worries you when he's jumping up and down, sort of in that manner, and putting that much weight and explosion on his foot. So as far as Simmons, no, I'm not that worried about it, because to me, I don't want to say he's completely healthy right now, but my guess is in a couple weeks he'd be okay to play in a game if the Sixers were still playing at that point, or didn't have more than a game or two. So no, I'm not that worried about it.
To me, it all kind of goes back to, do you believe that when they made that announcement that a surgery to repair it is inevitable? Or do you believe them that it's not that anything has gotten worse, it's just that it didn't get better at the rate that they were expecting it to? Because if it was still progressing, just not fast enough to make him available for the end of the season or to play at all this year, then you would expect him to ramp up his activity, to continue to do more on the foot, to continue to test it out more, to get back to the point where he can get back up to NBA speed. And if that's the case, if it wasn't that there was a setback, it wasn't that surgery is inevitable, but it is that, over the last, when did they announce that he was out for the year? end of February pretty much, but over the last month, it has healed. He is getting cleared to do more and more. Then I don't see why it would. Like, what are you expecting him to just do nothing until October and then play basketball again? Like, that's not realistic.
Right.
I think what I would wonder, to my knowledge, I haven't gotten a scan since then. So you wouldn't really clear him to do more until he gets that scan. And even so, like Rich said, he's been dunking for a while. He probably just felt a little better right now. But it would be great to me, this all comes down to, do you have confidence in these Sixers medical staff? Because if you have confidence in them, then you say, okay, they know what they're doing. They're ramping him up. They're being cautious. If he's doing that, that's good. That's a sign of progress. That's a sign he's getting better and getting closer. But because so much has happened, nobody here on this podcast or listening is going to say, yes, I trust that they're making the right decisions with these guys. And that's ultimately the crux of the problem. It really has nothing to do with Ben Simmons.
Yeah, and I do want to piggyback off of Rich's point a little bit about Embiid's size and just the difference between that and Simmons. Simmons just is a more fluid athlete. Part of that is just being a little bit smaller and also having grown into his body a little bit more when he, at this stage of his life and career. Embiid was still really figuring out how to be a basketball player at all, whereas Ben Simmons has been the prodigy for years now. So I think he has a better understanding of maybe his limits, and he's also a guy that's 7'2" and as big as Embiid is, and he moves a little bit awkwardly sometimes. He is a very good athlete and is a very impressive basketball player, but it's not the same type of slick athleticism that I would say Simmons has. So I think as far as like going up for dunks and doing different things and exploding, I have a lot more faith that, and minus the history of medical red flags, of course, is very important. I have a lot more confidence that Simmons can do that sort of stuff without necessarily over exerting or going too far.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difference between a coordinated athlete and Joel Embiid is clearly a coordinated athlete. Like, he has all kinds of footwork and hand-eye coordination that just you don't see in guys his size. But compared to an athlete who's been playing the game probably since he was about 3 and growing up with, a father who played basketball. And I mean, there was a video recently that came out of, Ben Simmons playing his father in a game on one-on-one on like a Nerf hoop when he was real young. And you can just tell that he's been doing this. His movements are a lot more natural. There's, he's not growing into being a basketball player. He's not a natural athlete that you're converting to a basketball player. And like Kyle said, it's more natural for him. So yeah, I agree. Anytime you have that much force landing like Embiid does, there's more risk anyway, but especially when that's landing, maybe a little bit unnaturally. And I think we all saw Embiid just, he makes you hold your breath 4 times a game just from the way he lands, and caught up to him.
Not great, Bob.
Not great. All right, the other injured big man, Jahlil Okafor, missing another game tonight against the Cavs, his 5th in a row, 6 of his last 7. I think he's missed now 17 games in 2017. Clearly, none of us have the inside scoop, but do we all feel like surgery is inevitable for him in the offseason?
I can't imagine how it wouldn't be after he went through a surgery that was supposed to clear everything up end of last March. We were told about 4 or 5 different times that Okafor over the 2016 summer that he was either just about to be back or that he was back. And then a multitude of times throughout the season, both in training camp, in this winter, now we're pushing into, it's almost April, and he's still dealing with a lot of the same problems in the same knee. I just don't see how you can't, even if it's just a brief arthroscope, that he gets a scope and they go in and check it out and just see if there's something else that they have to do or whether he's got to be on ice for a few weeks. I really just don't know. I'm not qualified to say what the solution is, but there's no possible way that his body could be this bad at healing if everything went according to plan last year. So it just, something's fishy here. And I think at some point you have to say, we really need to go in and see if there's something that we can do for this. What that is, I don't know, but it's definitely something they're going to have take a long, hard look at, given how long this has persisted.
I mean, in a season full of ridiculous injury news and sagas and whatnot, this might be the most ridiculous thing. The fact that he's still not healthy a year later after having this procedure, which was pretty much a minor procedure, something that he should have been back in the summer playing basketball, not in summer league. I'm not suggesting that, but at some point in the summer, he was supposed to be fine and 100% and ready to go for the 2016-17 season. The fact that he's still struggling with this is kind of mind-blowing to me. And yeah, like you said, I mean, I think they need to figure out, they need to do something. They need to at least put him on ice for a few weeks, because the fact that this is still lingering is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I remember when he wasn't ready for camp, and went, whoa, what do you mean he's not ready for camp? Like, he's had all this time off. It was such a short-term injury. And then they wouldn't use the word setback at all. Like, started off calling it load management, and eventually, his knee's sore. And then they kind of admitted at the end of training camp that, yeah, there was one day, one play where he had a little bit of setback. But still, training camp was, that was October. Like, we're in March. It's really an awkward situation. You wonder if there's more that they know that hasn't been let on. Obviously, you get a lot of conspiracy theories, especially with a guy that they're pretty openly talking about in trades. Look, they're not going to try to hide an injury. We all saw what happened with the Drew Holiday thing. They're not going to, try to trade him. Like, they're not holding off on surgery to trade him and pull something, pull something over on someone. It's just, you wonder if it's something where they're like, all right, there's going to be pain throughout the season. Let's get him through the season, get him in as many games as you can. But just from a trade perspective, if I'm another team trading for Okafor, I think I would have more interest in a guy who you announced, hey, we found this. This has been the cause of his problems. He's going to have surgery to correct this, than I would a guy who has had lingering knee pain for the last 9 months. So, to me, I think who knows? I can't even speculate. So many things have gone wrong with injuries on his team. But you do wonder if in a month from now there's going to be an announcement that they have to go in and clean something up and get him back on track, because right now he is very clearly not.
Well, so a couple things I want to... You brought up October, Derek. I wrote a piece in October at the time about how ridiculous the timeline was for him not being able to go and not being 100%. And I was pretty strong I felt pretty strongly about that at the time. And now we're pretty much at the end of the season and still dealing with a lot of the same questions about what's wrong and all that. So that's just, to me, that I think this has been the most poorly handled injury thing of the year. And that's really saying something. Although it's probably tied with Embiid just because of the importance and the Houston game and all the surrounding factors there. The other thing I would say, and I've been thinking about this for a while, I've been trying to do some digging around it to see if there's any actual real legs to this. But at this point, I have to imagine that other teams, when they're in discussions with the Sixers, or at least when they're evaluating the Sixers players, particularly someone like Okafor that they're trying to move, how much can they trust whatever the Sixers are telling them with regards to their health and their medical stuff? And how much can that impact their potential value on the trade market? Remember, this is already the team that, as we've discussed before, went through everything with Drew Holiday, where the franchise got fined because they withheld certain information about fractures in his legs, and that was a whole ordeal. And now you're seeing a season where they bungled the situation with Joel Embiid and put him back out there when they shouldn't have. Ben Simmons, who has absolutely no red flags in his medical history, breaks his foot and heals a lot slower than they anticipated. Potentially has a setback, if you want to frame it that way. As you discussed, Derek, some of that is just semantics. And now you're also dealing with a player who they have actively been trying to move, and he's still dealing with an injury from a year ago after they already traded the guy that had an elective surgery and rehabbed away from the team right before the start of the season. So at a certain point, if I'm another franchise, I'm looking at the Sixers. Anytime one of their guys has even the slightest bit of a medical issue, I'm having a lot of pause and saying, what's actually wrong there? And we need to get to the bottom of this and possibly discount our value of them, knowing that they haven't exactly been up to par when it comes to treatment, rehab, and protection of their players.
It's like, I mean, their injuries this year, like they're trying to figure out the worst, handling of a situation. It's like a loaded category at the Oscars or something. Like, like what was the year? I think like Forrest Gump, Pulp Fiction,
1994.
And I think Shawshank were all in Best Picture that year. It's like a loaded category. It's like, which one's worse? Like, I don't know. How about when they said Joel Embiid's meniscus wasn't a problem and it was actually the whole problem? Or Jahlil Okafor turning a 2-month rehab into a 12-month rehab? Or, and it's just, it's been a rough year on that front for the Sixers for sure.
Yeah, it has. All right, let's move on to future Sixers, which will dominate the next couple months of this podcast. NCAA tournament, for all intents and purposes, at least in terms of draft prospects, at least in terms of top 10 draft prospects, is wrapped up. Maybe Justin Jackson has a really good workout period and sneaks in, but probably not. I think we're pretty settled on guys who might be there for the Sixers draft pick. I guess, does anybody have any overall takes, opinions, anything that was changed because of the play? Any real thoughts?
Well, I don't want to overreact to anything. I know we try to keep a more balanced view of.
Here you go, Lonzo Ball.
Yeah, no, it's going to be the Lonzo Ball talk. But the game against Kentucky, that was certainly a good example of what I believe are the main concerns with Lonzo Ball. He was not able to do much probing in that game while he was covered with De'Aaron Fox. I think more importantly, he got absolutely torched by Fox, not just in that game, but in their matchup earlier in the season. And I know that at the end, if the Sixers were to draft Lonzo Ball, for example, it won't matter as much if he's not a great defender, because the hope is that you'll have somebody like Embiid behind him. And I think generally, I don't care about defense as much when it comes to guards. Like, Markelle Fultz was nobody's idea of a stout defender this year for Washington, and I still think he's the best overall prospect on the board. So it's not necessarily a huge deal. But for Ball to get dominated on both ends like he did and end up having to switch his defensive assignment because he was getting beaten by Fox so badly is not exactly a great sign when it's one of the few games all year where you're matched up with NBA level competition. That's definitely a thing that a lot of people overreacted to it, and a lot of people will continue to overreact to it because these guys do only really get it's a very small sample size against the type of talent that they're going to face at the next level. And there's team context to consider too. They're playing a lot of that game with somebody like TJ Leaf in the middle. And while he makes the offense easier for Lonzo Ball by spacing the floor, he's not somebody that I would say is exactly a defensive stopper or a rim protector in the paint that I trust. So there's a lot of caveats there, but yeah, the lack of penetration from Ball, he did still create some plays with his court vision and just using that spread floor to his advantage. But I think that's sort of your worst case scenario game for him, where if his shot isn't really falling, he's not as impactful of the game. You can say that about a lot of guys, but it does give me a little bit more pause on how I view his ceiling, I guess I would say. Not him as a prospect in general. I still have pretty high confidence he's going to be a good player, but I might have to go back and watch some other games and dial back what the likelihood is that he's going to to quote unquote get there as a player.
Yeah, I mean, Fox dominated him in that game. I still like Lonzo a good bit more than Fox because I'm just worried about people going under the screen on Fox all day. But Fox played really...
Which is funny because Lonzo apparently didn't read that scouting report.
Yeah.
And seemed determined to fight over every freaking screen. It was driving me insane just watching it.
Yeah.
UCLA is a weird team. Like, I do subscribe. Like, I do think, you know, the personnel with all of the ball handling and shooting on that team did help him offensively, but they really couldn't guard anybody, and that's not particularly Lonzo's fault, even if he isn't a good defensive player. Here's a question that I had just from watching the 2 games that Kentucky played this weekend. What do you guys think about Malik Monk? Because on one hand, I'm a little worried about him getting open sometimes. Like, sometimes I still struggle with him creating his own shot as far as, like, when they're playing that far up on you, like, can you get into the lane a little bit, buddy? I know you're a very good athlete, but, like, on the other hand, like, some of those shots he hit at the end of that game, even when he wasn't playing well, were just ridiculous.
Yeah, I have to fight a lot of dueling instincts with him, especially because for the Sixers in particular, if you're playing him with Ben Simmons, which they would be a lot of the time, the teams are basically going to have to choose, are you going to sag a lot and send more help at a driving Simmons and potentially a diving Embiid, or when bench units are out there, a diving Rashawn Holmes, who's a very capable lob threat, and are you going to shade coverage away from guys like Monk, or are you going to stay tighter on guys on the perimeter, which opens up things for Ben Simmons and pick and roll type plays in the paint? I think that's definitely, it creates a matchup advantage either way that I think would be beneficial to the Sixers in that team construct. But I do have concern. He did flash some effort and awareness on defense over this past weekend, which that was certainly a welcome sight. That came and went a lot during the season. So I don't think he's certainly, in my mind, never going to be anyone's idea of a defensive stopper. But as long as he's a passable defender, if he's the type of shooter that I think he is and that he proved he was over this season through a lot of volume, I think that he's a guy that you can live with a lot of his warts. But I'm still really going to struggle to figure out where exactly I can place him on any sort of board.
Yeah, I mean, I think we may have talked about this last week. I don't know. I could be getting my weeks confused, but he is a very good version of a player of a play style that I typically don't really like, and a play style that you then may want to weight a little higher and value a little more because of what the Sixers have and what the Sixers need. If this was a lesser version of Malik Monk, and if this was a team that didn't have any focal point already on the roster and in your future, I would probably, the articles I would write about Malik Monk would probably be very different in tone than the ones that I'll write now, because he very, very much does have his flaws and his weaknesses. But it's just with how important that skill set is and how much he is a very good version. I mean, that shooting is 100% legit. And I think he's going to have a lot of gravity in the NBA. I think he is going to be, like Rich said, he has good athleticism. I think he's going to be able to attack closeouts. So I think he's going to be very valuable for what the Sixers need around Simmons and Embiid. I don't know exactly where he is on my big board yet. I still actually haven't gone through the effort of filling one out and making one and really trying to make a real hard stance on my big board. Like I have ranges and I kind of know a general sense where guys fall, but it'll be really interesting when I do go in there to try to rate them because, you know, like I've said recently, this is very much a pick your poison draft. None of these guys are perfect. Which weaknesses are you willing to live with? Which strengths are going to translate at an elite level at the NBA? And which weaknesses can you help overcome with the personnel you already have on your roster? It's, to me, kind of a fascinating draft because of that. But I mean, everything you guys said about Monk is valid. His strengths are there, his weaknesses are there, and it's just rating how you value that. It's going to be fun.
I feel bad for the kid that the jumper didn't. Everybody's going to forget that he got Marcus Page by UNC because of that kid Luke May hitting the shot at the end. And by the way, I thought he got hit on that shot too. Like I thought
very easily could have gotten a call there.
Oh my God!
Degree of difficulty on that shot was insane.
And that's what you're saying, Derek. Like the shooting is so legit. I mean, that is an impossible shot. And
I still kind of think that shooting is one of those, and gravity specifically is one of those things that we underrate, because we all like to go to our models, especially on things like college, where maybe we don't have the sport view type data to make points, but we all like to go to our models, look at where guys rank, and the limitations of the box score stats are very much still there. And a guy like Monk, who is going to command so much attention on the perimeter, especially when you have guys who can then make the most of that attention. To me, it's a very valuable skill set. I just wish he did a little more, especially on the defensive side of the court.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the defensive side, I've briefly mentioned this on Twitter a few times. I am irrationally high on Jonathan Isaac compared to the consensus. I think he's in at least for a lot of the draft nicks, it seems like he's in the back half of the top 10. If that guy goes somewhere like Minnesota and it's a situation where it's Towns and Isaac are your two front court guys, or if he played in Philadelphia, I know that the Sixers now are running into a situation where they have a bunch of guys but because of how good Dario Saric has been and where you think Ben Simmons is going to be best utilized, it'd be hard to play a guy like Isaac that I think he eventually can turn into more of a 3-4 hybrid, but as of right now is more of a solid 4. But if you played Jonathan Isaac and Joel Embiid next to each other, you're not giving up more than like 95 points a game. Like they would just smother teams. Because I think the one thing that impressed me the most, I tried to watch a lot of him the last couple of months or so in ACC play and conference tournament, all that stuff. I know that they got eliminated first weekend, but he's one of those guys that he can go up to contest shots, but he's not someone that is chasing and then out of position for a rebound. He was very good at using his length to force guys to shoot over him and then sealing guys off, boxing them out, and still collecting the rebound. And that's not necessarily something that you see a lot of players at that age able to do or even willing to do, because it involves a lot of effort and investment at the defensive end. He does have some limitations on offense right now that take a lot of projection moving forward, but I really believe that kid's going to be an impact player at the next level. And as someone who, as we've discussed many times over on this podcast, prioritizes defense in the front court especially, he's someone that is going to be very high on my my theoretical wish list for the Sixers, or for any other team for that matter. So I just want to have that on record.
It's noted.
If only you had a place that you could type that out and put that on record, that would be great too.
Yeah, well, gotta save the draft stuff for the in detail stuff for when the season's over, I suppose.
No, I'm the same way. I mean, look, there's not going to be a whole lot of shit to write about between mid-April and mid-June, so I'm kind of saving that for that dead period as well. But all right, I think that probably wraps it up. We got nearly an hour over basically Hinkie and a whole lot of complaining about injuries, but thank you guys for hopping on, and we will talk to you soon.
All right, see you guys.
You've been listening to the Sixers Beat right here on LibertyBallers.com and LibertyBroadcast.co.
My mic check is life or death, breathing a sniper's breath. I exhale the yellow smoke of Buddha through righteous steps, deep like the shining, sparkle like a diamond sneaker.